Have you ever wanted to be king of your own castle? Well, future lords and ladies, do I have a surprise for you. This is our Norman battle keep from the 11th to 14th centuries, and focusing on the 5 themes that you see here, we will attempt to create a reasonably authentic medieval experience and medieval keep, right, based upon the sources as well as the build by Duty Boy. So as we engage in this study, all right, first of all, welcome aboard. I'm Professor Rob. This is a hands-on history production. We're going to be essentially creating or recreating medieval life. We're going to try to talk about what it was like to live in the Middle Ages, what it was like to live in a castle keep. There's going to be some limitations. Ultimately, there's some fantasy elements, game limitations. There's some anachronisms that are out of place, and of course, too much awesomeness, which is always a problem. Things like the Master Sword and dragons are included simply because they're awesome. And we're really trying to kind of bridge the gap between fantasy and ultimately reality. One other thing to keep in mind is we'll be using Minecraft, a very heavily modified version of it. Most of the mods are going to be in the description, so we'll talk about that there. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our survey about medieval life. A castle is only as strong as its foundation, so here we're going to start with a nice cobblestone core, which is going to support our thick walls later. Here you can also see we have our 4 turrets in position as well. Inspired by Rochester Castle, this is going to be a very typical Norman castle, very square, rectangular. That's going to be very common through the 11th through the 14th centuries. Some French keeps were round, some German keeps were built around a central tower called a Burgfree. This castle is going to be part of what's called a Motte and Bailey castle. Now I know what you're thinking. Obviously you look over the side and go, I don't see any water. Where's the moat at? Moat and motte are 2 totally different things. A motte is a tumulus, an area of constructed earth. Here, partly natural, but partly built up, right? We've built up this area, or hill, which allows us to dominate the surrounding areas. This is political, it's also militarily. I've got a hook shot as well, very interesting, and I'm flying on a dragon. But here you see a good bird's eye view of the motte that's been constructed. This gives us a vantage point over the surrounding area. The first floor of our castle is going to be largely reserved for a storehouse. The storehouse is essential to any keep because if the castle comes under siege, we need to have at least 3 to 6 months in order to survive. In fact, the term keep actually is synonymous with the Old English word for barrel, which is where it actually gets its terminology from, which is the importance of the storehouse. In French, the term is dungeon. And so dungeon obviously refers to a prison in later periods, or in some cases, a voluntary prison. Historically, most early keeps were built out of wood, but wood of course had one principal problem: it could catch fire. Also, wood was easier to construct with because you didn't need skilled craftsmen. But as time went on, as we get into the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, the abundance of stonemasons, and as lords gained more power and wealth, they wanted to show it off, and they would do so by constructing stone storerooms like you see here. Normans, like other medieval peoples, needed to make sure that their food supplies lasted as long as possible, and so storehouses would perform this role. Typically on the bottom floors of a structure, a lord could put his things there, and without modern refrigeration units, ensure that they lasted with the cooler temperatures. Also, things were pickled, things were salted. They used a variety of means in which to preserve things. This is how they were ingenious in making their food basically last the extra mile. So with that, our first floor is finally complete. As we can see, we have our spiral staircases here, and we'll take the arduous journey down into our cellar. And ultimately, here you can see the fruits of our labor. You also see the arches, right? The vaulting, which was very common in medieval castles. Here we can see our arches on clear display and our arch doorways as well. Arches were very valuable because they saved material and they obviously provided strength to the structure. We also see that we've provided some lanterns to light up the area. Castles served a variety of purposes. Typically, castles were constructed for military use, and so they functioned as strategic choke points and also as force multipliers so small forces could contend with much larger ones. Second, they were administrative structures. Primarily political in origin, they largely were a constant reminder of the lord's presence. The third aspect of castles is prestige, as lords would compete with each other to construct bigger and better strongholds. Castles took enormous amounts of time to complete. Typically, they could take as long as 10 to 20 years to construct a single keep. This was largely due to slow-drying mortar techniques, a lack of skilled workers, and lastly, a lack of materials that hampered castle construction. I just had to put this shot in here. It has really no relevance to the rest of the build, but we got the nice little archway, and we got the sun reflecting through it. I'm going to put some majestic music in the background. It's going to be just sick. Behold me mighty kingdom.
You are the greatest lord.
I lost myself there for a second. This is the second floor of our castle, which is going to be the Great Hall. Now, the Great Hall, here with our spiral staircase, is going to be dedicated to this here, which is called a gallery, or minstrel's gallery. And then we'll also have the main seating areas in the middle as well. We'll talk a little bit about these galleries here in just a second and their importance to the Great Hall. I've got two minstrels galleries here flanking the Great Hall. These were primarily designed for musicians to perform, sometimes out of the view of guests because musicians can be a rowdy bunch. But also it was an area for extra seating as well if the Great Hall was full of the Lord's guests. The galleries could provide extra security as well, as they stationed a harbor for archers. So if people were to, for example, seize the gate and get inside the throne room, right, they could be obviously led into with murderous fire. Or, in the case of this Game of Thrones clip, you could essentially massacre an entire house if you so desired. Yikes. Well, no one's going to get massacred in this throne room. Or at least, not yet. But this is where the king would receive his visitors and guests. The Great Hall was a multi-use room where feasting, dining, entertaining guests, and even servants would sleep on the floor. This particular section is referred to as the dais. And the high table that you see here is where the Lord, the king, his family would eat. And the other side in the middle, the low end, is where the peasants and guests would eat. Great halls also have significance today in that major colleges like Cambridge and Oxford still have great halls where students continue to meet. Another great example would be Hogwarts. That's less than historical and more magical. But this was a place, even today, where graduations can take place. At major universities, there's a dais. And on the dais typically are distinguished faculty and guests. And then the supplicants, in this case the graduates, typically are at a lower level, similar to great halls. And with that, our great hall is open and ready to entertain guests. Now I just need some guests. And friends. And a life. The fireplaces are primarily designed to keep our guests warm, but they could be used for cooking in a pinch, but more than likely, the castle would have its own separate kitchen. So most of the dishes are going to be created elsewhere and then simply bussed in by the servants. It just doesn't make sense to waste space on a kitchen.
You donkey!
Another practical application to our galleries is what these little things here. These are called arrow slits. Arrow slits are holes that are designed for archers and crossbowmen to be able to fire through with a very small likelihood of being able to receive return fire, increasing the security of our main hall. And with that, our second floor is complete. I'm really impressed with the result. I think it's turned out wonderfully. We've got some nice banners here to decorate. Ultimately, we can show people who's in charge. This is a great way to cow opposing dignitaries into submission and be a modest lord at the same time. So let's begin work on our third floor. As you can see, we've got the floor already laid out. It's going to be made out of wood. We've got a nice little hole here too, kind of like the Dallas Cowboys Stadium at Irving. But basically we'll have to cover this up, and this will be our soldiers' barracks. So we'll have soldiers, we'll have weapons, and we'll have beds in here. Great halls were typically decorated with the heraldry of the ruling family, in this case banners and shields that represent them either through pictorial or Latin mottos. This practice continues today with modern police departments, which use a shield as their badge, and also military organizations which use Latin phrases as their mottos. Here we have our wood floor and our fireplace for our soldiers to stay nice and toasty. Now, something to keep in mind, very few medieval builds are going to use actual wood as their floor. That's much more the later Middle Ages. Many medieval peasants slept on the floor, and a lot of times those floors were made out of dirt. But it could be tamped down with straw and other materials, but still, most people are going to live in dirt. So now we've installed our beds, so you can get an idea that this is a soldier's barracks. We've got bunk beds here so that we can maximize our space. We've got some barrels here for storage of the soldiers' goods, and we add another fireplace just to make sure that everybody stays warm. Remember, there's no central heating, so the fireplace is going to do the bulk of that work. So here we have the outside exterior of our third floor, and we can see that our castle or keep is taking shape nicely. We have arrow slits along the corridor to provide defense, and you can see the exterior of the stone. The majority of castles in the UK are built out of ragstone, which was locally available, and here you can see it on full display here. So here we have our barracks mostly complete. We've got our bunk beds, we've got a nice dining table in the middle, and we've got some more beds over here by the fire so soldiers can keep warm. As we get down to the floor level, we can see we have a couple of doors for exit. We've got some chests for soldiers' belongings, and we've got some tables so that generals and soldiers can plan their next campaigns. The thing that's important to understand is that this is not an era of professional armies. These armies largely are going to be levied in mass, but there would be bodyguards, there would be knights and such that would be in the service of the Lord, and that's where most of these people are going to be living. So the barracks is a nice, comfortable addition. So in all of our talk of providing a house for the Lord, it's the one thing that we haven't done yet is actually provide a place for the Lord and his family. So that's what we're going to do on this floor. The fourth floor is largely going to be reserved for the Lord's private residence, his retainers, anybody who's important to him. And here you can see we've already laid the foundation. We've got the wood floor that's ready to go. It's just aching for a medieval home makeover. So our barracks is now complete. We've got some banners on the walls, additional chests, we've got some lighting in here. All of this, I think, kind of adds a homey comfort to this room. This is ultimately where the soldiers are going to be stationed. This is speculation, of course, because at actual Rochester Castle, a fire gutted most of the interior. So it's likely that this was probably a chapel, but we're really unsure as to what actually was on the third floor. With the advent of crossbows and more devastating weapons, walls incorporated this feature that you see here. These are referred to as crenellations and merlins. Right? Merlins are projections of stone that stick up, which allow the archer to be able to hide to reload. This was particularly important for crossbowmen who are extraordinarily vulnerable. Let's go ahead and jump back on Night King, and we'll go ahead and investigate this structure here in the front. This building was referred to as a forebuilding, and it was a very common feature in Norman keeps. The idea is that this would be the first line of defense. We've got a small walkway here that's relatively narrow. It's made out of stone. This is going to funnel the attackers into a small area where we can put fire upon them. Here we can see the forebuilding lit up during the day, so you can get a better idea of what it looks like. We've got the machicolations at the top. We've got a nice little walkway here that's lit up. And so again, if you're an attacking force, you're going to take this route. This is going to be your only access into the castle, so it's going to funnel a large army into this narrow area. We'll now take a look at our finished forebuilding. Here we've got a nice arched doorway in which to keep attackers out, made of solid oak. We've got a second door here to funnel attackers into. We've also got these little holes in the ceiling. We'll talk about those in just a second. We've got some reinforced beams here as well. This room's going to be extraordinarily sturdy. So as we enter the throne room, we'll go up here, the winding staircase. As we continue up to the third floor, this takes us into the barracks or soldiers' quarters. And we've got this little door here that we've put in. This is directly above the entranceway. We've got these little devices here. These are called murder holes. And we're going to talk about their form and function here in just a second.
Fatality.
So let's imagine you're an attacking army. You got these little holes up here. What are those? I wonder what that is. I'll get in here. Oh, look at all these freaky mannequins. That's going to make me go nuts. And then, oh, I don't know what those holes are for. I'll get in the door. I've knocked it open with a battering ram or something. And so now I'm on my way up to pillage this castle. I'll go up here. Now these soldiers don't have anything. And then I walk out here and what do I find? Well, this is essentially why you don't want to get stuck in the forecastle area. Because what's going to happen is attackers are going to open up these murder holes and they're going to pour hot boiling water down on top of you. Now, one of my biggest pet peeves is the idea of boiling oil in movies. Water is far more effective, and we'll talk about why. No. Just no.
Medieval warfare was brutal, and castle defenders had a terrifying secret weapon: boiling oil.
No, they really didn't.
When invaders tried to breach the walls, defenders would heap massive cauldrons of oil and pour them through special openings called murder holes. The scorching liquid
Were there
didn't just burn
APCs in the
attackers,
Middle Ages?
it caused chaos, made surfaces
But we got, is this the
dangerous and
Wehrmacht? Do
slippery,
we have some
and
World War
forced
II
enemies
soldiers
to
marching
retreat.
into our
But
castle?
was boiling oil really the
Moral of the
go-to
story,
weapon,
don't
or
use
is there
AI
more to
for
the
your
story?
YouTube shorts. I mean, yeah, again, just use water. It's a lot more effective. Oh, and of course, yeah, we gotta light the guy on fire. That's just that's a given. I mean, I guess in theory, but no. Yeah, and now your gate's on fire. Congratulations. Really good job. I don't think it really catches fire that easily, but at the end of the day, water is cheap. It's plentiful. It does the same thing that oil's going to do. Oil's expensive. It's just a better option. All right, so on to another popular myth, and that's the idea that castles had dungeons. In this period, we built one here just for the sake of having one, but dungeons were very rare in Norman castles, and so if they did have one, that was usually for some obvious purpose. Here you can see ours has some cells. We've got a nice little hatch down here in the bottom, and then we've got an underground portion of it as well. The hole here is for obvious purposes. Dungeons actually had a French equivalent. They were called forgetful rooms, and the idea behind it was that you would put people in there and then just forget about them. Typically they were claustrophobic, they were very small, but again, very rare in most actual castles during this period because there wasn't a real strong tradition of keeping prisoners for long periods of time during this era. Actually, the real purpose probably for the dungeon, the torture aspect gets added like in the Renaissance period. They were actually like latrine drains. So most of the time, I guess your punishment would be that you're going to be next to the poop hatch, because garderobes would typically drain into these areas. So maybe that's the most ultimate form of punishment, is being surrounded by farts. But that's ultimately what their real purpose probably was. Ultimately, Dungeon has some major significance today because of games like Dungeons and Dragons and Zelda, where you go into these dungeons and face monsters and such. In reality, they were usually built into gatehouses and towers. You didn't really see them a lot in keeps, and if you did see them, basically the people, their torture was that they had to smell everybody else's, and sometimes probably be covered in other people's. So we go up the stairs. Ah, what a wonderful view. We can take our mind off of being covered in human poop. Unless you like that sort of thing. So now we have a roof. The roof obviously has a nice slope to it so that it can handle adverse weather. Not all keeps had roofs. In fact, many of them probably did not. These were spaced for battlements, right, and additional towers. And we'll add some of those later, but I wanted to put a roof on mine, so thus we have a nice terracotta roof. So our keep is looking very fancy with its new roof. I also want to talk about the structures here on the sides. These are referred to as buttresses. They perform two functions. One, they add strength to the build, and two, they allow the chimneys to vent. There were no conventional chimneys during this period. All right, so we've come to it at last. We are now ready to decorate the Lord's quarters. We have our fireplace, which is set up. We have a couple of windows, which are slightly larger than our arrow slits, and we've got some lighting. So now it's time to rock and roll and actually decorate this place. So here we have our partially furnished Lord's room. This is where the Lord and his family would occupy their quarters. We've got some tables here. We've got a little lectern area for the Lord to conduct his administrative business. We've got some bookcases because the Lord's family would have been literate. Here we've got a nice fire to keep people warm, a little parlor or entry area. And this area is our bathroom, which we refer to as a garderobe, and we'll talk about what garderobes provide. Garderobes, or bathrooms in the Middle Ages, were not the most sanitizing setup. As you can see, there was really no expectation of privacy, although the Lord actually does have his own room. Typically, there would be a hole in the floor where you do your business, and then it basically would just go out one of the tubes out the outside of the castle. This could dump into the moat if you have one, or it could just go into the street. That was typically considered acceptable. One last note on garderobes is typically they're also used in many languages as like cloth keepers or places where coats are stored. The reason they use this terminology is because people would actually put their clothing to literally freshen them up in the bathroom. The idea was that when you would produce waste, it would create ammonia as a byproduct, and so there was the thought that the ammonia would cleanse fleas and parasites and other stuff from the clothing. So clothing was going to be pretty nasty, especially if you had Taco Bell the night before. It's very unlikely that the Lord is going to have windows at the top floor up here. Number one, because during sieges, they're just going to shatter. And number two, because glass was very expensive in the Middle Ages. And so it's very unlikely that this is going to be in a building that's largely for military purposes. This is the Lord's bed. As you can see, it's a canopy style bed. People still sleep in these even today. We got large curtains here to ensure some measure of privacy, even though the Lord still occupies this with the rest of his family. So we got a nice dining table now for our Lord and his family to share a nice meal. We've got beds for the Lord and his wife. We've got some clothing racks. We've got a nice garderobe for privacy. We've got a second bed over here for any children they may have. So we're pretty well suited for our Lord and his amenities. So we take to the skies on Night King. Here we've got the beginnings of our turrets taking shape, our four corner turrets. You can also notice these wooden pieces next to the windows. Those are shutters. Shutters were somewhat common in medieval buildings. These ones in particular could be closed and opened to release fire. So we don't have windows, but we do have shutters, and those shutters can provide a degree of protection for any missiles going into the Lord's house. Access to many of the upper towers and levels are going to be provided by spiral staircases. One of the common myths that's circulated on the internet, at least in recent years, is that spiral staircases were used because they're very narrow, and because they wind to the right, they basically work to the advantage of a defender who can stab the attacker, who essentially is mostly going to be right-handed. It's bullshit, folks. There really is no conclusive evidence to show that this is why medieval people built staircases. In fact, there are staircases that go the other direction. They built them that way largely because that was the style or because that was the prevailing texture of that time. It doesn't have anything to do with defensive purposes. Now, yes, they're pretty narrow, so you could get a lot of people in a narrow area, but for the most part, if an attacker gets inside the walls and they're in your staircase, you're pretty much already screwed. My goodness, is this like Daenerys Targaryen's apartment building up here? Look at all these dragons. So we've now finished our fourth floor, which includes our castle corner turrets, our roof, shutters, etc. We've got four corner turrets, which provide visibility on each corner. We've got arrow slits for archers and crossbowmen to fire, and we've got a sturdy roof to withstand sieges. So you may ask yourself, well, one of the big problems that medieval people had was, where did they put their dragons at? Well, we've got an easy solution to this problem. Dragon landing pads. As you can see here, we've got them clearly marked. We've got some matriculations here on the walls to be able to fire down at enemies. So now Night King has a nice little comfy spot where he can hang out. Very, very historical, by the way. We've got to have these things. And that pretty much finishes our keep. We've got a pretty well-designed, semi-historical 11th to 14th century Norman castle keep with turrets, walls, arrow slits, all the things that we would incorporate into that kind of design. We've also got our dragon landing pad. Don't forget that. Very important. We have to have that. But again, a pretty historical build. We've got some, really cool things here, I think, building on not only the foundations of Rochester Castle. We've got some elements of Winchester Castle in there. There's several other elements in there too, as far as what we're looking at. Warwick, I think there's some elements of Warwick in the towers, but we basically tried to create something, and I think it was successful. Again, we've got a little ballista platform here too that I created, little siege weapons for defense. I think it's reasonably good. I mean, certainly Minecraft is a game that is not originally designed to be historically accurate, but I think with the right tempering, a lot of mods, and some good old-fashioned historical learning, I think that you can make a pretty decent keep. And in this case, I'm pretty satisfied with the result. Really satisfied with the little Rob sign there that my daughter put in there. Of course, I had to leave that. So ultimately, this completes our castle keep design. I think that's pretty good, and overall I'm very excited about it. So this completes our video. We have our glorious Norman-style battle keep here shining in the sun. I think it was a worthy enterprise. I mean, certainly our major question was, is it possible to recreate a reasonably authentic Norman-style battle keep from the 11th to 14th centuries? And I think through the 5 aspects that we looked at throughout the video, I think it's possible. Certainly, I believe that there's some limitations. We had some issues, obviously, with authenticity, fantasy elements in there, dragons, master sword, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, I think, that one could make a reasonably authentic recreation of the past with some limitations. Certainly, this is a very heavily modified version of Minecraft, so there are way too many mods to mention in the conclusion, so go ahead and check the description for those. But this ultimately, I think, is a worthy enterprise. Minecraft's an extraordinarily popular game. I think anytime that we can bring any kind of media into the historical profession, I think that it's a win-win for both parties involved. We thank you for joining us on this hands-on history production, and we'll see you again in a future video. Thanks. Have a good one, everyone.